So to prepare for payroll year end, another little checklist here for you. First thing on this list is to actually check if you've got a week 53. So I'm going to show you how to work out if you've got one and what you need to know if you do. Step 2 is to process and update your final pay period of the 24-25 tax year. And this actually includes processing any leavers and submitting your last FPS, and if you need to, an EPS as well. Please note, neither of these submissions are your final year-end submission. That does come when you process your year-end, which we'll cover in part 2. And the last step again is to take a backup of your data. So you will hear me say this quite a few times during the webinar, but it is just because it's so important to do. So with this checklist, I am going to give you a bit more information on each of these steps and a demonstration of them as well, starting with week 53. For those of you who pay your employees weekly, fortnightly or 4-weekly, I'd advise checking if you've got a week 53. Those of you who pay monthly, you're never going to have a week 53. So this year it does land on Saturday the 5th of April. I don't imagine a lot of people will be affected by it, unless of course you do pay your employees on the Saturdays. But how it's worked out is, of course, there's 365 days in the 24-25 tax year, which divided by 7 equals 52 weeks. So that's what you kind of normally expect a year to consist of. But it does leave 1 day remaining, so that day doesn't fit into those 52 weeks, hence week 53. And this year, that's Saturday the 5th of April. So, as I said, if you run a weekly, fortnightly or 4-weekly payroll and your regular payday is going to fall on this date, you will have a week 53. If you run a monthly payroll, you won't have a week 53 at all, and that's because all of the days of the tax year fit into those 12 tax months. So just to show you what I mean a bit more visually, I do want to bring up the tax calendar that we've got. This is just from the Help Centre. And firstly, you can see all 12 tax months here. So if we just have a look, we can see all of them there. We can see all of the days of the year fit into those 12 months. That's why monthly payrolls don't have a week 53. But if we go down to tax month 12, where we are now, or will be for payroll year end, you can see week 50, 51, 52, and we can see 1 day, 1 extra day that doesn't fit into those 52 weeks. So it's got a new week there, week 53, and this year it's only Saturday the 5th of April that falls into that. So that was just to show you a bit more visually what I mean by that. If you do have a week 53, so you've checked and you do have one, there's nothing different that you need to do. So all you need to do is change your process date to the 5th of April in payroll and then process as normal. So the payroll will automatically apply the week 1 calculation for any relevant employees as tax. There's no need for you to change tax codes or anything like that. If you do have a week 53, you just process this pay run as normal. And just a reminder there, that's Saturday the 5th of April. If your payday falls on any other day, you won't have a week 53. So that was step 1 of the checklist. Let me just turn my camera off, and I do want to move on to step 2. So I'll bring up payroll, which was processing and updating the final pay period. So I run a monthly payroll, as we can see here, and my pay date falls on the last day of each calendar month. So for month 12, my pay date is going to be the 31st of March. And I can just see my process date set to that in the bottom right corner. So that is the last pay run that I need to process in the 2024-25 tax year. So not much to do differently at all for your final pay run, to be honest. So I'm not going to be spending too much time on this, but definitely a few things to bear in mind, especially if you've got any pro rata directors on your payroll. If you do, the final pay period for them does have an automatic recalculation of the national insurance. So if you do have any of those directors, you will likely see some changes to their national insurance and to their pay as well. So I'm just going to open up employee number 1. They're actually a director on my payroll. And I'm going to go to the employment tab. And I can see for the director status, they're actually set to that pro rata basis. This also used to be called the table method. But this basically means that this director's national insurance has been calculated as if they were a normal employee for the year so far. But for the final pay, it needs to be recalculated using the annual basis instead. So that is the other type of director that you could be. The annual method doesn't have this recalculation, as that's actually applied throughout the year as normal. So this is only for pro rata directors. And I will explain a little bit more once we go back to the slides. But let's go ahead and process my last payment of the tax year. So I'm just going to highlight all of my employees. I'm going to check my process date. Make sure that's set to the last day of the month for me, so 31st of March. And then I'm going to go and open up Enter Payments. If you've got anyone who's like a leaver or on hold, for example, selected during this process, just a case of deselecting them, just to avoid accidentally processing any payments for them. We can see I do have a leaver. I also do have someone on hold, so I don't want to include them in the Enter Payment screen. So first employee, this is the director. Nothing to change here in terms of their pay, so they do still receive quite a regular amount per month. So if I go ahead and click Save Next, I will actually see this message come up. So this is a kind of confirmation message that they have been recalculated on that year-to-date basis. So for this employee, or the director, their national insurance figure will likely be quite different to what they normally pay. So I'll just click OK, and I will come back to that in a little bit. Everyone else's pay is pretty much the same, to be honest. I'm just going to click Save Next, just for quickness there. Employee number 5, this employee is on parental leave at the moment, statutory paternity pay. And if I just pop to the summary tab, they're actually receiving 2 weeks of SPP this period. Now, since I'm reclaiming the statutory payment, as well as my full payment submission, I'm going to be sending an EPS as well a little bit later on in the pay run, and that will help me reclaim this statutory payment. But for now, let me just save next. Just for the sake of getting through the content, obviously I am doing this a lot quicker than you will be, and I'll go through everyone there. So next steps after Enter Payments for me would normally be the pension assessment, my pre-update reports, and then uploading the online pay slips as well. Now for today, I'm going to skip those steps, as I say, just to get through the content, and we'll pretend I've done them, and we're going to go ahead and update the records. I did mention you are prompted to take a backup at a couple of different points in your pay run. This is one of them. So at this point, I would advise taking a pre-update backup, just so you've got that kind of secure there. And then you go ahead and work through the update records wizard. So I click next, double check I've got everyone selected who I need to, and then click finish. And we can see my last updated date for those employees is now changed to my last pay date of the month. So that is my records all updated, and that is step 2 complete. I do want to just go and talk about the directors again. I know I did loosely mention that recalculation before. So if we just pop back to the slides. So the way a director's national insurance is calculated does depend on their status. That's either going to be annual or pro rata. No matter what status they are, by the end of the tax year, all directors must have paid the correct national insurance contributions, and that's going to be based on their cumulative earnings and the annual rates for directors and I. If their director status is the annual basis, that calculation is just, it's calculated throughout the year as normal. And they don't actually pay national insurance until their cumulative earnings reach the primary threshold, which is £12,570. But if they're a pro rata director, like my director, their national insurance has been calculated using the kind of normal weekly or monthly thresholds throughout the year, as if they were, a normal employee. So this recalculation needs to take place in the last pay period, now using those annual thresholds for them. To give a bit of context about the recalculation as well, this is a report for my director, so I just want to show you kind of what it's done and why it's done it too. So this is a screenshot of the payment summary history part 1 report for the director. And here we can see we've got my director's monthly earnings here for each process date of the tax year. So this is a mostly regular amount of £3,025, apart from December. So they actually got a Christmas bonus this pay period, hence the big pay spike. And this month, the wage went up, so did their national insurance contributions. So they went up to £428. So that is expected. But since this wage was actually above what's called the upper earnings limit, anything above that limit was only 2% national insurance contribution. So it wasn't, quite enough. But if we then look at the gross pay across the whole year, just down here, that's £46,300. That is less than the annual upper earnings limit, and that's why month 12's contributions look so different. So month 12 national insurance contributions are £688.80. And that's because payroll's done that recalculation based on their annual earnings instead. So essentially in the last pay period, so in this case March, the director is actually paying the national insurance that they should have paid back with their bonus in December. So I just wanted to give a bit more kind of context around that recalculation. But yeah, that is step 2 of the checklist complete. We have processed our final pay run now, we've updated the records, and it is now time to move on to step 3, which is processing leavers. So just looking at the statuses of my employees, we can see I've already got someone who's a leaver. See their status set to leaver there. You might, however, have an employee that you haven't made a leaver just yet, but you need to, before you do new year end, or you've just had simply, people who've left in the last pay period. Now, I don't have anyone else leaving me, but if I did, all I would need to do, at this point is highlight them. I like to go to Wizards and Leaver, and it's just going to be a case of working through the Leaver wizard. So this is going to guide you through the process of making them a leaver. It's also going to make sure that you can produce the P45 for them. And then, of course, when you send your FPS, the leaver information will be sent across to HMRC as well. Another webinar we are running over payroll year end is all about starters and leavers too. So I will be going through this whole process in a bit more detail, including some kind of common payroll year end scenarios as well. And remember, anyone who has left your payroll before the 5th of April, they don't get a P60. They would, of course, instead get the P45. You'll also see I've got an employee on hold. So they are still employed with me, but they only work seasonally. So they only work like through student holidays and over Christmas and things like that. So they aren't actually going to be returning to work with me until after April, so after I've processed payroll year end. Now, employees on hold, they won't need to be taken off hold unless they're returning to work and receiving pay, in which case, you change their status back to OK, and you would just process their pay as normal. If they weren't returning at all, this is when you would make them a leaver too. So after you've updated the records, before you send that last full payment submission for month 12 or for the last pay period. Now, this employee has been paid at some point in the tax year as well, and they are still employed with me. So they are going to be getting a P60 as part of the year-end process. And just a reminder there, I can keep them on hold for that payroll year-end process. Now, although I don't have any leavers to process, that is kind of that step complete now. So leavers are kind of taken care of. And next step I want to move on to is submitting the full payment submission, and in my case the EPS as well, or employer payment summary, since I'm going to be reclaiming some statutory payments. Now, just to be clear, this full payment submission is not your final year-end submission. That is going to be a separate submission to do as part of the year-end process. These submissions that we're doing are just kind of the normal, FPS and EPS. So again, make sure your employees are highlighted. I'm just going to double check my process date in the bottom right corner, and then I'm going to go ahead and click full payment submission. So this is going to submit your normal payroll information, your liabilities for the pay period, and as I said, any kind of new starter or leaver information as well. So if we just look on this list, if I did have anyone who hadn't been, made them a leaver or had any new starters, there would be a little flag in either of these columns. And something else to point out in here too. So final submission of the year, we can see that set to no. So that is how we know that, there's still a submission that we'll need to do after this. Of course, got the liability there. And it will also send over like student loan information and things too. I'm just going to go ahead and click submit. Just in case of waiting for this. And once it's been submitted, you can, save a kind of report of that there, print the submission log if you need to. But I can see now my last FPS date is updated to the 31st of March too. So I'm good to go. Now, since I am reclaiming that paternity pay for one of my employees this period, I am also going to be submitting my last EPS of the tax year. Again, this is just a normal EPS for month 12, and I can do this from either the e-submissions, I've got the option for the employer payment summary there, or I've also got it in the payroll links section too, and you can resize this section if you need to. I'll go ahead and click this. You do get different options depending on what you're sending the EPS for. Now, since I'm recovering the statutory payments, I'm going to select this first option and click next. You can't change this, but it's just confirming that it's tax month 12. The year-to-date figures for any statutory payments throughout the year, so I can see those 2 weeks of paternity pay for the employee. And I did also have someone on maternity pay a little bit earlier on in the tax year, so I've got that information there too. And I'll click next. If any of these are applicable, of course, you'd fill in that information too, but I'm just going to go ahead and click next and finish. And then that'll bring up the submission window for the EPS now. Very similar to the FPS in terms of working through this, so I'll click continue and submit. Again, we can see it's not the final submission of the year, so we know there's still one to do. And I'm going to go ahead and click submit. And once this one's been submitted, that is actually step 4 complete. Perfect. I'll click close. That's step 4 complete, and the last step to prepare for year end was to take a backup of my payroll data. So now that everything kind of payroll related is done, the next step would naturally be moving on to processing payroll year end. At this point, I'm going to go to File and Backup. Again, just work through this wizard. And this time I'm going to call it 24-25 payroll complete, something like that. Next and finish. Perfect, and that's been successful. So that was how to to prepare for year end. We have completed those 5 steps now. Just a kind of reminder there, the FPS and the EPS are not that final submission. You do see that little flag in the submission screen to let you know that. So if it says no, that does mean there's still another submission yet to do. But these 5 steps are really important to do. You will need to make sure that you've done these ahead of processing year end itself. Now that we have done them, when we're ready, we could then go ahead and process payroll year end itself, which is something that we're going to cover in part 2.